Joe Thomas in the morning on the phone with Ken Cuccinelli, who was by most media reports leading the floor fight over the floor vote that wasn't cast and the very bizarre yays and nays that didn't seem to be distinguishable from one another. Ken, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing better now. I've done my breathing exercises and calmed down, and so things are getting better.
So what was the floor vote fight about? I've heard everything from releasing the UFO files to voting Ted Cruz in instead of Donald Trump. So what were you looking for a floor vote on?
We were looking for an up or down vote on the rules report, which is frankly pretty standard sort of thing, but we wanted it done in roll call fashion, state by state. Would have taken about an hour, and we complied with the Rule 39, that addresses how you do that over 7 states. Majority of 7 state delegations wanted that. 11, in fact, did. They didn't. Those numbers that you heard from the stage were not accurate. What we wanted was an up or down vote, and it's very important for listeners to realize, especially in Virginia, this was not about Never Trump. I'm Never Hillary, not Never Trump. Made it clear since Ted Cruz got out of the race that I intend to vote for Donald Trump, and he's going to be our nominee this week. That's not an issue for us.
Okay.
There are maybe 2 or 3, maybe, Never Trump delegates in the entire Virginia delegation.
Wow.
That's it. For us, it's overwhelmingly about getting grassroots rules. Now, part of this is, you understand, and so now half the people listening, their eyes just glazed over. Rules, blah. But, we do 3 things at a convention. We pass a platform, which is a statement of our beliefs as that what does it mean to be a Republican, and that went smoothly. We vote on the rules that are going to not just cover the convention, but the next 4 years of the RNC.
Right.
And how it's going to operate. And we also nominate, I guess we do 4 things. We nominate a vice president and a president. Mm-hmm. And platform is a plus, rules a horrible negative, vice president a plus, and of course then we're coming, the one that's predetermined, I guess Pence is predetermined now that we know it, but we didn't know it until a few days ago, is Donald Trump.
Right.
Being the nominee. So this was not about any of that. It's being cast in the media as all sorts of different ways about Never Trump this or that. For us, we have the biggest coalition of conservative grassroots members on the Rules Committee in modern history.
Wow.
We had delegates, lots of former Cruz delegates. We had Kasich and Trump representation in the coalition on the Rules Committee. We had people who never supported any candidate in the nomination in the coalition. And the reason we did all this work was we hoped that because Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, this is way back in May, that we would have the biggest gathering of anti-establishment delegates that we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And that is probably the case, but the Trump folks threw in with the RNC rather than separately dealing with these rules in a way that you'd think their delegates would like to deal with them.
Well, yeah.
For instance,
okay.
Well, let's talk about some examples. We proposed to fix some of the parts of the system Donald Trump correctly called rigged.
Right.
Rigged, or as close to rigged as possible. Let's start closest to home with Virginia. The hated nominations committee in our state convention, which was a source of so much anger and vitriol and frustration and division. And you bet it was. But it was in the rules, and you had to win in there to win on the floor.
Okay.
Effectively.
Yeah.
But in every state, and many states use those nominations committee, it was angry, mean, and divisive everywhere. And the Trump campaign never won those battles. The only people who won those battles were either the Cruz campaign or the establishment in that state. And let's face it, nominations committees are made for the benefit of the establishment. So
right.
They can control who goes before the convention. And we advanced an amendment to get rid of nominations committees' uses across the country. That wouldn't help Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz did better in there than Donald Trump, but it would have helped all of us who are anti-establishment, because that's what that's about. And they locked arms, Trump and RNC locked arms to defeat that. And then the worst of them all, it didn't happen in Virginia, but the worst of them all were those selection committees, party selection committees, where literally the party bosses in Florida, New York, Indiana, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, literally go behind closed doors and pick the delegates that are going to go to Cleveland. And pick. And that's outrageous. No voter input, no electoral accountability, no election at all deciding who those people are. Nothing. No way to affect it by the grassroots. We put in an amendment to get rid of that rigged part of the system, and the Trump folks joined up with the RNC and defeated it. Amendments to get lobbyists off the RNC. We don't need special interests on the governing body of the RNC. Spreading out the chairman's power. Instead, they consolidated chairman's power. Providing accountability and transparency to RNC. Instead, they literally passed a rule to keep things secret in the RNC. They went the other way.
They what?
I mean, this is like the world turned upside down. So, but I'm getting hyped up here. That's what this vote was about, is all of this went the other way from how it should have, especially given who the delegates of this convention are. And, of course, they were never given an opportunity to have that laid before them. Even in the Rules Committee, it was just whip votes. When you see the RNC put out a text to the Trump RNC team that said, anything Morton Blackwell speaks to, Virginia Rules Committee representative, vote against.
Wow.
They did the same thing to Bruce Ash of Arizona, who is the chairman of the Standing Committee on Rules of the RNC, who endorsed no one in the nomination process, who had the temerity to try to improve the rules of the Republican Party alongside us.
Hey, Ken,
that was the result.
Ken, I've got to take a quick time out. I want to come back to this. Back at the Huntington Conference Center, which is part of the whole amalgam of conference centers here at the RNC convention, Joe Thomas, and unconventional coverage, and no more unconventional on day one was the leader of the Virginia delegation, former Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate and State Senator Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, I think it bears repeating, because there was an awful lot going on in the last segment, that this was actually stuff that Donald Trump was talking about all the way through the campaign, which was, this is a rigged system, and you were trying to unrig it, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, for us, this was about finally taking power back from the establishment and returning it to the grassroots, which is completely consistent with what he was saying across the country once the votes started to be cast. And he expressed his displeasure with various parts of it. And there are parts of it where he's just dead on right. And so we were trying to fix that, and unfortunately that opportunity was lost. But for me and for the Virginia delegation and the majority of the states who were looking for a roll call vote on Monday that caused all the ruckus, well, we didn't cause the ruckus, that resulted in the ruckus, on the floor, what we were doing was not anti-Trump. It was not about the nomination. It was not trying to move somebody else in. We're voting for Trump for the nomination. It's about getting good conservative grassroots rules, and the only way to do that now is to vote down the rules that came out of the committee and make them go back. And for anybody who thinks, well, that is stalling, it would have taken an hour, and I got news for you. We had about 2.5 or 3 hours from the afternoon session till the evening session.
Yeah, so you had the time.
Plenty of time. Their roll call vote is about an hour. Instead, they had a half-hour-long rigmarole where they were steamrolling us instead of obeying the rules. And instead of that half hour of negativity, they could have had an hour-long vote where they would have obeyed their own rules, and the party that says it respects the rule of law could have done so.
I read that, yeah.
Instead of breaking it for the second convention in a row. This happened in 2012. The RNC and the establishment steamrolled the grassroots and consolidated power, and they did it again in 2016.
Well, let me ask you this then, Ken. I mean, how do we fix this? Because you look at the approval ratings of members of Congress and elected officials in general. The voter participation rate is terrible. Is this? I mean, this seems to be endemic of all that's wrong with an America that's supposed to be a representative republic. Yet the people who need to be represented aren't turning out.
Well, and to put the cherry on the ice cream, tonight we get to hear about unity from Mitch McConnell. The senator who, last time I checked, had the lowest favorability rating of any Republican senator in America, and I think of any U.S. senator in America. Mitch McConnell is going to lecture us about unity while he tells us over and over, election after election, we're going to, quote, crush conservatives everywhere, end quote.
That's amazing.
That's Mitch McConnell.
Well, but let me ask you.
For Mitch McConnell.
Let me.
Be unified.
The question here, you better be unified or you're going to get crushed. But Ken, let me ask you, what about the people who are running around and in a very progressive way saying, well, what you're doing is just going to help get Hillary elected?
Look, we're a political party. We vote. I mean, that's what this is about. The notion that you shouldn't have votes and disagreements is ridiculous, but we have a process to resolve those disagreements. That's why we have rules in the first place, and the Republican Party, for the second convention in a row, failed to obey its own rules, violently broke its own rules. It was really pretty awful. One man from Alaska, Fred Brown, was literally physically restrained from turning in petitions for Alaska to join in the demand for the roll call vote. He was physically held by the RNC floor staffers in the Yellow Hat to be prevented and turned away from providing Alaska's petitions in support of it. Now, we didn't need Alaska's petitions, but that behavior was just appalling.
Yeah, that's
intimidation tactics all over, including in the Virginia delegation. They came after one of our youngest delegates to, basically threaten him. And he said, "Are you threatening me?" Which they didn't expect. And, suddenly they started to backpedal and they went to other delegations.
Yeah.
So they were beating the tar out of Iowa and
Unbelievable.
Washington and D.C. and Minnesota and Maine. And, it wasn't pretty.
Well, so what's next, Ken? What happens now? Not just, I know you're still with the Senate Conservatives Fund, and there's lots going on there. But what happens next with this? Because I feel like we've got to, before we become Bastille Day more than Independence Day, we've got to get the faith of the people who are making $40 grand a year and $50 grand a year and struggling to pay the rent check.
Well, look, what that's about is not internal party politics. That's about campaigning on issues that matter to working families, and frankly, Donald Trump has made that a focus. I think has been very clear about that. But then the follow-on question is, you got to do it. I mean, back to Mitch McConnell's failures. Mitch McConnell campaigned on defunding Obamacare and fighting illegal, all these different things. And who does he fight hardest against? He fights hardest against people like Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, et cetera, Rand Paul in his own state. Actually, they sort of had an accommodation.
Yeah.
When they pursue policies that Mitch McConnell himself campaigned on, he gets mad when they don't capitulate alongside him. He doesn't. He is not the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. He's the head surrenderer. That's what he is.
Well, I said this to a friend of mine on a local level. There was a contentious issue. Shocked, I know that you are, Ken, to hear that. But I said, if we campaigned against Democrats as hard as we campaign against other Republicans, we would never lose an election.
That is so true. I mean, have you ever seen John McCain go after a Democrat as hard as he attacks conservatives? The answer is a simple no.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, no. I mean, the list goes on, sadly. John Boehner, no. Not in the last 20 years, anyway.
So what's the news of the Senate Conservatives Front? Are there fresh faces coming up?
Well, Darrell Glenn spoke last night to the convention. Colorado U.S. Senate candidate did a spectacular job, as he always does. He's a 20-plus year veteran. He's a great candidate, built a grassroots organization for a year and a half, went into their state convention in April, and with 8 other candidates competing, he got over 70% of the vote.
Amazing. That's amazing. That's powerful.
It is very powerful. He still had to go on to the primary. He knocked those 8 out of the campaign, but went on to win. He is an all-star. He's an up-and-coming star who stands on his own. Air Force veteran, Air Force Academy graduate, Colorado native, a good good man. In addition, he's really a great one to get behind. He's the real all-star Senate candidate in the country, standing separate only from Mike Lee, who once he got through his primary, he has a Democrat challenger, but it is Utah.
Well, yeah, that's it. Well, Ken, I appreciate it. SenateConservatives.org? .com. All right, SenateConservatives.
SenateConservatives.com.
And for all of you friends of the feathered out there, also don't forget GunDefenseLaw.com as well. And many of my friends have, told me to thank Tom and Ken and certainly John and everyone else involved for starting that as well. Sad to say, but sometimes when you defend yourself, you've got to have somebody defend you afterwards. But I appreciate you for that. Ken, travel safely, my friend. We'll see you on the floor, I guess, at some point tonight when we get lectured by Mitch McConnell, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll have a different protest. Just kidding.
Thank you. Ken Cuccinelli on Joe Thomas in the Morning.